let's kick those things off. How's it going, guys? My name is Ben Potter. I am a senior developer at a company in Billings many of you probably have never heard of. It's called Payment Alliance International, based out of Louisville, and our dev shop is in Billings, Montana. A team of about 12 people. Fairly large application, legacy code base, about 16 years old, with about 2 million lines of code. Fairly large application that we manage. Back in 2016, we were taking a look at some of our information, and we came to the conclusion that we needed to shift our application to meet the demands of our user base. Okay. At the time, we were taking a look at our users, and we were seeing a trend start to occur. And we were starting to see more of our users start using mobile than desktop, as many of you, I'm sure, have started to see inside of your user bases as well. Okay. So we decided we have to start thinking about a redesign. Okay. Out of the users on desktop, we had a breakdown of various browser sizes. We had about 12% of our users inside of what I would consider a very small device, under 1024 pixel. Most of our user base was in the 1024 to 1400 pixel range, so medium-sized desktops. And then we had another 10 and 30% respectively in 1400 to 1900 and above 1900 pixels. Kind of what you guys are probably seeing inside of your Google Analytics as well. So our user base is pretty old. Most of our users are sort of older people, so it wasn't surprising to see that they were all starting to get the new iPhone and still using their old laptop. Okay? And so when we started talking about the redesign, there was a few things that we had to accommodate. First, we needed to emphasize mobile. We were seeing a trend. We're up to about 70% mobile usage now at this point. And so we had to emphasize mobile. We also needed our application to work well on a medium and large desktop without ignoring those smaller desktop sizes. Okay? So we analyzed all the different sizes and we came to a breakpoint. In addition, we needed to be easy to maintain. Big application, legacy code base, it had to be easy to implement and had to be easy to maintain for a long period of time. So we landed on one responsive breakpoint. Okay? We weren't going to split across phones and tablets. We were going to just push smaller tablets into one breakpoint, and so we selected a breakpoint of 1023. It's a fairly common breakpoint to accommodate smaller devices. This would get the phones, smaller tablets, and we would let the larger tablets have the desktop experience. So we began work in September 2016. We launched our first beta, January 2017. We had both application UIs at the same time, so people could switch back and forth. We had very high user adoption. It was very great. And in April 2017, we released the entire thing and forced every user over into our new redesign. And things were going great. We were really happy with the redesign. Everything had gone well, and we were about a month in, and we started to run into a problem. There's an accessibility feature in Windows, I'm sure many of you were fairly familiar with, known as font scaling. Okay? And most of us run at 100%. What we were starting to see is that some of our users were running at more like 125% font scaling. And now Windows does something very strange with this. And instead of scaling the fonts up in the device, they instead just reduced the resolution of the device. And so the JS engine that we were getting in our browsers was seeing the browser at 1280. I'm seeing heads nods, you guys have seen this. And we were actually seeing it render in 960, which was below our responsive breakpoint. Because what it was doing was actually reducing it down to 75%. Okay? And so we got stuck. We were really stuck on how to solve this. And then it actually took us a while to identify what was actually the issue, and somebody stumbled upon it. And we had this thought of, what if we break our style sheets into two completely distinct segments? Okay. And so most of our application is written in Sass, and so we had this everywhere that we had put our responsive thing down to the one thing. Right? We have this, and that looked something like this. Didn't look exactly like that, but something like that. And so I went into our settings properties for our application, and I changed it to this. CS Media's token will be replaced by the build. Okay. And I wandered over into Gradle, and I pulled up something that looked like this. And I said, go walk through all of our style sheets. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that token and we're going to shove that value into it. And then very importantly right here, we're going to take that file and we're going to move it over to something, instead of .css, we're going to move it over to something like CSS mode. Conversely, we did the exact same thing for desktop. So instead of replacing it with the token we expect to make the responsive actually happen, we shut it off, okay? And rename that to CSS desktop, okay? Then we added a servlet that boiled down to something that looked like this. Our do handle would have a return that looked basically like this, get the thing, get the URI, and then determine the type, and the type looks something like this. We have a bunch of tools built in already to determine things like user agent, and we would just append dash mobile or desktop. And so now, when we were all done with this, we had a directory in our styles that had two files in it, a style sheet dash mobile that had our responsive breakpoint in it, and a style sheet css.desktop that had it disabled, okay? And then the browser is still just requesting .css, and then our servlet selects the appropriate file to stream back into the client. And this worked really well. This immediately solved the problem, because if the device that was accessing our website identified as a desktop, they got a desktop experience, end of story. This allowed us to then accommodate more mobile devices easier. If we wanted to add more responsive breakpoints, it would be no sweat, because we're never going to bump into our desktop experience. Okay? So we can optimize directly for large tablet devices without impacting the desktop experience. Okay. The other thing that it allows us to do is to build the inverse. We built desktop-only styles. And so there was a specific thing that we ran into where I had built a flourish on one of our menus that had a hover effect on a pseudo element. Okay? And on the iPhone, when you tapped on that link, it activated the hover on the pseudo element instead of actually activating the link. So you would have to double tap. It's a terrible user experience. And so I went in, I doubled up what was going on in the build, and instead have now a desktop-only style sheet thing. And I wrapped that piece in that, and now it only happens on the desktop. So in the long term, this has been out for a little over a year now in our application. We ran into a couple of issues. The issue that we were fixing hasn't reoccurred, but we did run into an issue with the servlet where we weren't handling the cache. It does that now. We have seen negligible performance hits on the application servers. We could have issues with significant load. We haven't experienced that though. We increased a little bit of build time, and our QA team has to know to hard refresh various things if they're switching back and forth when they're emulating mobile devices. But all in all, we've felt that this has been a very acceptable solution, and we're pretty pleased with it. So there we go.
My name is Damon. I'm from Luminet. If you guys could close your eyes real quick and think about an artist. What are they wearing? Where are they? What do you see when you see an artist? Now, keeping your eyes closed, think about a programmer, software developer. What comes to mind? Get those images real well in your head. You can open your eyes now. So if you're anything like me, when I think of an artist, I think of someone probably in like raggedy clothes, not because they're poor, they're very well might be struggling, but because they're about to paint on a canvas, and so they need, you know, the clothes to be able to receive paint that they just don't care. And they're maybe in a studio, they're passionate, they're about to create something. And you might have, for the programmer, gone an opposite way and seen this dark room, computer screen on this face, someone typing away, probably some bags of Cheetos on the floor, and energy drink beside that person. But that's a stereotype, right? That is a stereotype that we all have encountered and to some extent live under, and for good reason, because stereotypes do have basis in truth, correct? And so the problem with that is, let's rewind to 2000, year 2000, .com was going. I was 15 years old, super passionate about web development, hadn't ever done it before, but I wanted to be in this internet thing going on, right? And so, being a creative person, I was in dance, I loved like choreography, I loved art. I never considered being a programmer when I was 15 because I didn't like being on the computer for long periods of time, like, and just coding away. Like, I love being outside, I love being creative, like producing. So naturally, I started going to UI, UX development. I got myself a pirated copy of Photoshop and started developing web pages. Learned some basic HTML, CSS was right, and just started developing web pages. Never really clicked. Honestly, really wasn't good at it, if I was being real truthful here. But you know, I got through it. It was not, you know, I had real jobs, you know, like coffee shops, real jobs, right? Growing up, and I did like web pages on the side just because I was never passionate about it. And it wasn't until in 2012 that web page needed some dynamic something or another, some database support, and I'm like, you know what? You know, I'm gonna give this thing a try. You know, I'm gonna shy away from it. Let's make this web page dynamic. So I headfirst into PHP, MySQL, because that was a smart thing to do at the time, and emerged about a month later, having found my vocation, having found what I was so passionate about, and realizing that what I really wanted to do since I was 15 was to code. But even at that moment, when I found that passion of coding, like I dove head in. I read everything I could on computer science. I read every book I could. Barnes & Noble books stacked this high because I didn't know about Stack Overflow, you know, stuff like that. Googled everything I could, etc. But the stereotype was still in my mind that I wasn't a programmer because I didn't fit the bill. I didn't fit that normal bill. But 2 years later, someone asked me a question, why do you love programming so much? And it just came out of me. I hadn't prepared it, and it was just like, I love programming because I get to create scalable applications, like produce something beautiful and functional while living under the confines of logic. And it was like, oh, that's it. That is why I love it, is because programming is creative, and it hit me. Programming has always been creative. A programmer has to think creatively to build a database architecture, to think about like dry concepts, and to think about how does this application scale from 10 users to 1 million users. And thinking that is such a creative process, but the stereotype still to this day is like, just sit down and start typing. You know, sit down and start coding. You know, maybe do some planning on paper. And it really has removed on a large set this like creative ability for the programmer to be creative and flow in a way an artist does when they're creating their painting or sculpting out of clay, right? And so so what happens when you mix the creative mind with the logical mind? Let's think about this. Some of the great scientists of the past, right? Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Ada Lovelace, Benjamin Franklin, Grace Hopper, some amazing mathematical, scientific minds were also creative geniuses in their own right. They had to fully give themselves over to a creative process and build this creativity from the ground up, and in order to create new theories and theorems and to create new computer programs and actually develop computer science and electricity and how that works. Like the creative minds, these amazing mathematical brains were also geniuses at creativity. And so it is so important to make sure that as a programmer you are developing within yourself a creative ability and the creative license to work like an artist. And that's what I always used to get so down on myself, and I always used to be like, oh, I'm not warming the seat at work. You know, like I just can't. I'm just staring at the screen. I can't be creative. Like what's wrong with me? I must not be a programmer. It was until I had this revelation that it's like, actually, I just have to find my creative flow. And so now I know how to jumpstart my creative flow. Does it always work? No. You know, but at 2 o'clock, if I'm just not feeling it, or if I drop out of that creative flow and it's like, you know, I think I'm done for the day. I don't feel any pressure to sit in my chair and warm the seat for the next 3 hours. I go home because I know that when that hits me, probably 7 o'clock that night or 9 o'clock that night or even in the morning, whenever that flow hits me again, that creative flow, that ability to produce and create hits, I'm going to be so much more productive because I'm not trying to force this creativity into a flow that it's nearly impossible. If you ever talk to an artist, and we all know them, several of us probably are, it's nearly impossible to just build that flow, bring that flow out just intentionally at any moment. So I've learned techniques, walking, or like some sort of, meditation. Certain music hits me differently, and it actually gets me into that creative flow to where I can start thinking about things creatively. And so, as the bottom line is, only the artist, only the creative mind can see things alternatively. And that's where the difference is between the creative and the logical. And I think this industry that we are in right now is in such a pivotal moment. Last 5 years, the next 20 years, as these minds, these teams are growing, and people who had access now have access that previously didn't have access to learn computer languages because of Udemy and all these online courses. So people who identify first as a artists now are thinking logically, and now those who identify first in logical thinking and now are being drawn to think creatively, and that produces something absolutely amazing. It's a game changer. It's going to be an industry changer as we mesh those two minds together, and I think it's going to be a very beautiful thing. So as an employer, make room for that creative flow for your developers. As an employee, make room in yourself to think creatively, to think alternatively.
So, I am Will Lowry. I also work at Payment Alliance International. So if you think back about a year before we started thinking about our new redesign, our mobile look, we had another problem. So we started going to make our application more responsive. And in order to make your application more responsive and more JavaScript oriented, you actually have to be able to serve non-server-side rendered HTML down. Because every page load we had, it was a hard right page, next page, next page, next page. We had very, 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 very little JavaScript, but we did handle like select boxes to toggle checky boxes. Like we were bare bones JavaScript. So as we started moving to more nice responsive UIs, we had a problem. We had no underlying architecture to serve down data to the client. So we were strictly in a, well, not particularly fun MVC called Barracuda MVC using XMLC templates. So we would compile XML into a Java class, hand that Java class a model, render down that page. So we had about a 3.5 minute cycle to see what our change was, which is not particularly great if you're changing just little things on a page. So we were trying to do our best to get away from this. So one of the things we started to do was take little steps. So we converted our model system into just being able to render down JSON, send it down to the client, only the data we wanted, not all this other stuff that we were doing. So we got a little bit of savings on our data marshalling to get what we wanted. But now we had another problem. So our application, as Ben said, was 15 years old, which means we have a relatively old security module, which we have to keep intact. So we can't show some person this data if they're not allowed to see it, and the rules to do so aren't exactly straightforward some of the time. So we have stuff we have to keep together on our data model. So this led to very repetitive code. We would have pull this data, apply the security model, pull this data, make sure they can see it, then marshal the data down, do our little transformations, so we always serve dates down, everything in the same format, and then we would ship that out to the client. So what started happening is we would get our system to the point where one JavaScript file would dictate completely what the server would send down to it, so we had this weird coupling. So this endpoint over here was tied 100% to our JavaScript, which led up to questions like, can I actually remove this? Does anyone else use this? And it's not particularly easy to find out if, yes, you can get that field to go away, you don't have to pull the data anymore. Because our site was in flux, we're changing things, but at the same time, you always have to display some data in the same way. For example, if you show a business, you have to show the name, location information is important, like where is this at, and our internal code, because we have some of those. So this led to a bunch of little tiny use cases and data modules that are more or less identical, with a more or less identical security module. So we started talking about how we could make this more generalized and allow users to actually just pull the data they wanted from the client side. Because how great would it be if you're just working your JavaScript and said, I need these 3 fields, pull them down, this is the business I'm operating on, this is my business object, let's pull stuff down. So the things we needed to do to get there were, first of all, we had to guarantee that we always applied our security model. There has to be nothing you can do to call this imaginary endpoint that we want to get data you don't have access to. The next thing is we do want that single data point in the sky. We don't want to have to worry about where a bunch of URLs we have to pull data from and how we're going to marshal that data down. And we want that to always be uniform data too. So we can't all of a sudden switch to formatting dates in a weird way. And then the next bullet point we really wanted was it has to be relatively easy for our developers to get into this whatever thing we're building, so that they can start so it's natural to them. It's technology they've seen. So those are our ideals. We had a couple of constraints, and the security is the big one. So it's ideal and a constraint. So the first and the next priority thing we wanted for a constraint was it has to be fast to develop for the for front-side developers. When you're in that space, you have to be able to pull things down quickly because you have a fast cycle when you're laying out a page. System formatting, and now there's a couple of things that we were willing to throw away. We said the data didn't have to necessarily be as fast as it was in the old method because we're applying our security model in general. So we're willing to take a little bit of hit there on performance because we wanted our site to, we wanted it to be fast and easy to maintain over performant, which is a trade-off we may have to revisit later, but those are all the trade-offs we make. We also said we can make this system as complex as we need it, but it has to stay in one spot. So your complexity can't creep out of this little box we're building. And we also said we don't really care about analytics at the moment. So we don't care what data you're pulling down. We're not going to bake that in immediately because, well, we didn't have a lot of time, and we didn't necessarily know that this idea was going to fly at all. So what we built, so if you take those criteria, you put them in your head, language, something to pull from the server that is familiar to most developers. We've got a nice system that they'll be relatively familiar with. It's got uniform formatting. We already have a language like this, SQL. So what we did was we implemented a SQL endpoint where you could send SQL up to the server, and it would figure out what you wanted and send it down. But it wasn't quite SQL. So we had some restrictions because, well, you can't just take SQL from the client and run it on anything. That's no point. So what we did instead was we found a really cool tool called Antler. It lets you parse strings into an AST and read through it. So we validated our SQL. So we validated our AST, we made sure it was valid SQL. So we didn't accept things like insert or update or delete or truncate or drop. Those words aren't okay. We only supported select and joins and some where clauses because this is about where you can get. So now we know what tables we're going after, what data we want. We can readily apply our security model now because we know what all the pieces we want. We want to know how we're going to put them together. So this was good. It was looking great. And that is exactly what we tried to do. And it worked. After about 2 weeks of some intensive TDD with a pair, he's in the audience, Jewel Reif is over there. He's like, yes, we got this. We got a prototype built. So we wired it in. It worked. The majority of our new UI is now actively pulling from our server with our fun SQL. So there's some weird issues that we have now. Well, weird. So now we have this weird file up in our sky and our server side that defines our entire data schema, how we want to access it, how we perform our mappings, how we apply our security. So we got role level security, we got schema level security. So if people querying our endpoint can feel like, I don't get to see some columns based on anything. And that was awesome. And I think at this point I'm being counted down. So the last thing I want to say is there is one downside that we had. At this point, the one thing I'm not particularly comfortable with is now just about all of our JavaScript knows about this one thing, which was the goal, but is also mildly terrifying. Because we can easily break lots of things if we break it. And that's about where I'm at. So I don't wander off now.
All right, my name is Kelsey Iverson. I'm a UX UI engineer at Elevation Web Design down in Victor, Montana. Brand new startup, and this is actually not really, I'm half remote with that company. And I 2 days in office in Victor and 3 days out. But for the last 4 years, I've been on 7 boats, 25 Airbnbs, and unlimited friends and family's couches. I'm sure you see it a lot on Instagram and Facebook these days of everyone going hashtag remote life and van life and minimalism and things like that. And I thought that was pretty cool when I first heard about it. So I tried. And this is my failings at that for the last 4 years. A very honest look. So I was a yacht stewardess for 3 years, freelance. And this is an epic picture of a family of dolphins that I could kind of enjoy, but I have been seasick for 2 days. I did not post that on social media. but that was the reality of that moment. Another Miss Mother's Day. This is pretty sad when you're on the road so much, especially when you're out on islands, barely able to talk on the phone, barely have internet. It's hard to send and organize a Mother's Day gift. That's another thing that you don't hear a lot about traveling. There's a lot of mental overhead that comes into traveling, and that is my excuse, Mom, I'm sorry. But this is my Happy Mother's Day card to her. It was just a picture in the sand. Grandpa wants pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. Where's the whisk? Where's the rolling pin? And is there any nutmeg in this Airbnb? Most of the Airbnbs you stay at, the kitchens are not like 100% there. There's like, yeah, there's maybe a cookie sheet that you can kind of use and things like that. But a lot of the time you're spending time running around collecting items that are missing at each Airbnb. You get to move into the laundry room. So this is fun. I did not post any of this on social media, but this is actually during a breakup of a partner and I. We got into the yachting industry together, a year contract on a boat, and we broke up 9 months in. So from going to a shared bedroom, I had to move into the laundry room actually to finish those 3 months out because we were both committed to the boat and committed to the captain. And I don't know if you've ever had to work with an ex, but working with an ex on a 120-foot boat for 3 months with very little time off the boat, it's an adventure, but I learned from it and yeah, didn't post about it. Achilles tendonitis on a 3-story boat. I had just, we were down in Miami. I was learning how to longboard on like South Beach. It was amazing. I wrecked and like kind of popped my Achilles tendon and had to finish out a contract on this boat for a month in a boot, like climbing up and down stairs. But yeah, the only person that knew about that injury were the people on the boat and my mom probably, but it's like, it's not a glorified hashtag picture to put your boot in the, I don't know. My bank is in Montana, so this is another one that you don't really think about when you're going off to the ocean. At least I didn't at the time. And a lot of times we could get our paychecks direct deposited, but there'd be people that cash tips kind of thing. And on boats, it's a percentage of the rental of the boat, so sometimes they're like part of your salary, and it's extremely difficult to get them into your bank account. And it takes a lot of time to do it. Next episode of Honda Fits on Ice. This is during a break in jobs, and that's another thing as a freelancer. You sometimes go a lot of time without a job and without knowing for sure where your next paycheck is coming from. And these tires are so bald in this picture, and it was terrifying to drive around Montana to visit family over Christmas and holidays. But we did it, and yeah. So this is another really weird memory. Is this epic picture. We were adventuring up this waterfall with this group of friends, and everyone's having a great time. Everyone's just laughing and goofing off, and like, all I could think about is like, I'm not sending out resumes right now, like to get myself my next job. And you don't get a true vacation when you're 100% remote. Someone borrowed my bike, wallet, and money at Burning Man this time. So I got to go to this epic place in the morning because I was walking by myself across about 4 miles of what they call playa. Back to the campsite early in the morning because someone had stolen my bike that had my backpack, my wallet, and all my money and everything in it. As a traveler, again, if you are traveling, you usually only have a backpack, and I have a backpack and a purse. So I keep everything with me at all times. So when you lose something big, it really sucks. Okay, so guttural sobbing at a campground. When you have to mourn something that is unexpected on the road, and your next stop at a safe place or anything is like weeks away, and you don't have any family around you, you set up your tent and you have neighbors and you still have to mourn. Like, that's a very human experience. You don't get away from it just because you're living this remote life. And so yeah, this is very embarrassing for the people around me, I'm sure, to hear me all night long. But it's a part of being human, and that's just sometimes how it goes. I have the flu and deadlines. I got to work on this amazing project as an artist apprentice, and I pretty much built Groot, baby Groot here, from scratch. All the painted bark pieces, the guys on stilts underneath. And we had a deadline. It was Halloween costume contest. So the whole month of October, in exchange for rent and room and board, I was working for him, and I got the flu. So when you're working for room and board, and you have to sleep at someone's house that you're technically working for, it can be hard and kind of awkward. Grandma might not make it through Christmas, so can we please work remotely from Kalispell? That's just that. When you need alone time, sometimes, especially on the boats, it was very hard to get like alone time away from everybody. It's like you, as a kind of closet introvert and needing to recharge by myself, I sometimes have to go to Denny's at 2 a.m. and read a book and drink a coffee because that's how you can get alone time. Are we packing tonight or in the morning? A week-long Airbnb, and then you're on to the next Airbnb and on to the next one. And sometimes it's like 4 in the morning packing before work starts the next day, or should we pack tonight? It's 11 o'clock. Again, sometimes thank goodness for programs like food stamps, because sometimes if you've had an injury or an illness and you don't have a job, you have to depend on public giving. So thank you very much for anyone who's ever given to these programs. My glasses are held together with tape in this picture. Again, it was one of those breaks between jobs. My glasses broke and we had to wait until the next thing. So yeah, hashtag remote life. It's not everything you think it is, but it is awesome. This sounded a little negative. I'll give it that. But there are so many good experiences that I do post about, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
All right, so I'm going to talk about Flutter really, really quickly. In case anyone doesn't know, Flutter is a new thing from Google for making mobile apps using the Dart language, which is also a Google project. It's pretty cool. It's a little bit like React Native because it uses kind of this idea of composable components. And it has a similar, it uses kind of a similar like diffing algorithm to do updates. So it's kind of neat. You'll notice, if you're familiar with React, you'll notice some similarities. So the coolest thing, for me, I think the coolest thing about it is you can do iOS and Android in a language that, for those of you who don't like JavaScript, I don't really like JavaScript, in a language that still feels like a real language instead of like the Wild West. But you don't have to worry about quite as much as you do when you're using like Java or Swift or Objective-C. So you'll see how short this is. So we start out. We have a main method here. And I basically wrote this last night. I went to a coffee shop and wrote it. And I also found out that my phone has like a bug where I can't actually sideload apps onto it because I was gonna like put it up here, but anyway. That's Android for you. All right, so we've got our main. It just calls this run app. It creates an instance of this run app widget, or sorry, this app widget, and passes it to this run app function. The widget, this could be anything. This is just the thing that's going to be mounted onto the screen. And actually, I should go ahead and run it. So what I built, oh gosh, what are we doing here? Oh boy. What I built is a lightning talk timer. So I wanted to have it on my phone and have it like going over here. Apparently you're not going to be able to see the bottom of it, and I'm going to have to break it. But anyway, the way it works is there's just a single button. You click it, it sets a counter for 8 minutes, and it gives you a nice little green check mark. When there's a minute left, it changes to a little warning thing, and then when time's up, it changes to a big red X or whatever. Okay. So it's very, very simple. But now that you have some idea of where we're going with this, you create an app, you implement a build method, which is kind of very similar to like a render method in React, And then your return value from your build method is essentially just another widget. So just like in React, you just return React components from your render method, and then those eventually get rendered. In this case, because this is a Google thing, they make it really easy to use material design. So you notice that the app that I just sort of showed you the top half of had used the material design sort of language. It also have a like Cupertino version of this, they call it, that uses the iOS design language. So it's kind of neat that you can get the native look and feel. You give it a title, you can give it a theme, and then we jump over to the interesting part, which is another component that I called home. So home just takes a title, and that's the thing it prints up at the top. And this one is a little more complicated. This widget is stateful. So you can have a stateful widget or a stateless widget. A stateless widget is more like a pure React component, where you never call setState basically, and you just use the DOM diffing to do your updates from above you, right? So your parent components determine your state. A stateful widget has state. The counter has states. The countdown timer that's implied state. So I made this a stateful widget. You split that up between the widget itself, which has the static properties, right? Like the title. That's not part of the state. That's a property, if in React speak. And then you create the actual state down here. And this is sort of like a controller. You could think about it in that way if you really wanted to, or like a view controller. In this case, I have two date times, now and the end of the timer. I have a timer that actually ticks every 900 milliseconds so that I can update the UI. And I call this method when the timer ticks. I create a new now. And then I check if now is before the end, and if it is, I just re-render. So set state with an empty callback is like sets in React, like setting the state with an empty now. It just causes a re-render. I also have some other helpers that just do some cleanup. And then you have a life cycle. So the components have life cycles, just like in React. So in this case, init state is on before mount or whatever it's called. And dispose is like or did on mount or whatever it's called. Build again is like render. And in this case, we just build up, just like in React, we build up a list of widgets that we're going to barf out onto the screen. And we can optionally set some colors, right? So depending on the state of the timer, I set some, I choose an icon and I choose a color. I can insert that into the list. And then I give it to this scaffold thing, which is just another material design helper widget. And that centers it for me, that puts it in a nice column layout, and then we're good to go. So the cool thing, one of the cool things about this is, I just remembered that I can do this. Yeah, there we go. I didn't have to do anything special to support like device rotation or anything like that, the way you do if you write this in Java. Now I think React Native will also handle this stuff for you. But it's kind of cool because it's basically like writing an app in a much higher level, or at a much higher level API than using Java or Swift. I didn't have to worry about a lot of memory management stuff. I didn't have to worry about the device rotation and like unmounting and remounting the view. And I also don't have to worry about creating creating whatever wrappers need to go around various components the way I do in Java. So it's pretty cool. I would encourage you to check it out. It's flutter.io, and like I said, it's super simple to get started with.